Gretchen Jahn has been involved in aviation for more than 40 years as both a pilot and a general aviation manufacturer. She's a former CEO of Mooney Airplane Company in Texas, general manager of Alpha Aviation in New Zealand, and COO of Remos Aircraft in Germany. She is focused on startup and restart companies over her career. As a commercial instrument-rated pilot, she competes in cross-country air racing. Gretchen, welcome. We're delighted to have you.
Thank you for asking me to participate.
Gretchen, tell us how you got into aviation as a career.
You know, many people, when they're asked, when they're younger, have this concept of what they want to do with their lives, what career path they want to follow. You know, people who say, gee, since I was 6 years old, I wanted to be a pilot, or wanted to be a mechanic, or I wanted to be a doctor, or what have you. And they tend to be able to follow that particular desire through their lives. The path might be a little tortuous, convoluted, but it gets them there. But then there are the rest of us who have careers that do a little bit here, a little bit there. We follow our various capabilities, things that are interesting. And early on, when people asked me what I wanted to do, well, I wanted to be a brain surgeon. Well, I never really got there because in college and graduate school, I got my master's degree in experimental psychology, and then computers came along, and I was interested in that. And got to do things with computers and statistics. And then the Digital Equipment Corporation was hiring women and minorities. So I became a software engineer, followed that for a while. And then, I went out and I started my own company and developed software for manufacturing companies. So I became interested in manufacturing, got certification in manufacturing. Then I had my one really good idea, started a company, raised venture capital for it. For software for pharmaceutical and biotech manufacturers. But I've discovered as I went along, I'm really good at getting things started. I'm really good at getting a group of people to go out and achieve wonderful things. But then it gets to a point where I'm not so good at running a company anymore. And I lose interest. So I hire somebody else, bring them in, and I go start the next thing. And so, on the basis of all of that, I was recruited for my first aviation job, which was as CEO of Mooney Airplane Company, and to bring it out of bankruptcy and reestablish the manufacturing process. And you see, along the way, in parallel, I'd also become interested in aviation and gotten my license and gotten involved in air racing and so on. So it was a really natural blend of manufacturing and aviation and speed, because Mooney is known as aircraft for speed. And as usual, got to a point where it needed somebody else as CEO. So I went down to New Zealand and did the same kind of thing for Alpha Aviation, and then went to Germany and did the same sort of thing for Remos. And then said, I'm done running companies. Okay, so then I became working with a lot of other startups and restarts on their manufacturing process. The majority of them were in aviation. And in many cases, the hook here is that many of them were involved in innovation that was directly applicable to sustainability in the aviation industry. So one thing led to another, and that's how I got here.
Diversity in aviation is a big topic. Can you talk about your experience with diversity in aviation?
For me, a significant element of diversity is that of diversity of thought. I find that if you're going to really get a project done well, it's really good to have people of multiple kinds of backgrounds who will then ask good questions, and they will question the established wisdom. And diversity and focus on that allows you to bring in that kind of differences of thought and questions. For example, my startup company, I had people with different ethnic backgrounds. I had someone from India, from someone grew up in Belize, someone from South Africa and Canada, and women, and racial backgrounds and what have you. And we were able to create something wonderful. And I bring this kind of element to other companies that I work with. For instance, I have a different example of a startup company that I worked with. It was in aircraft manufacturing. And I remember one time in meeting with their senior management and their board and looking around the room, and I said to them, one of the significant issues that you have is that you have no real diversity in this room. And they looked at each other, and because there were women and different racial backgrounds, all this kind of diversity that we normally talk about. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, all of you graduated from MIT. All of you have been trained to think that way. You have no diversity of thought process. You have no one from somewhere else who will ask questions. And for you to then say, oh, gee, I never thought of that. And factor that into what you're doing in building a company.
Gretchen, how close are we now to getting certification from the FAA for these new trainer aircraft?
Here in the United States, the current projection for, say, the electric airplane from By Aerospace is that it'll be at least another year, hopefully 2 years, not as any more than 2 years from now. Much of it depends on the ability to take test data, write it up into the kinds of reports that are acceptable to the FAA, write it up in ways that are repeatable so you can show over and over and over again that you get the same results. The industry has been working on sustainable fuels for 20, 25, in some cases 30 years, and trying to get to a more sustainable industry as a whole. And it seems like nothing is happening. The reality is that there is a lot happening in the background, but it's very complex, time-consuming, and costly. Why is that? Significant drivers in the industry in getting things to market is that of safety. You want to make sure that the airplanes that you produce are going to be safe to fly, okay? And you also want to make sure that your production processes are repeatable. So you have the same product every single time and it's safe. And the organization that really works with the industry to ensure that safety and has that as their absolute number one primary objective is the regulator. In the United States, that's the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration. And everything that you do in designing an airplane and producing an airplane has to go through FAA review. They need to make sure that it is going to be safe and repeatably producible. Now, the attitude of the regulator has a lot to do with how long that particular process takes. And I discovered that between manufacturing here in the United States, down in New Zealand, in Germany, which have 3 different regulatory bodies, and in many ways, different regulatory styles. But that of the regulator here in the US is caution. Okay? If you are designing something that is very similar to something that's been designed and built and flown before for many, many years, the FAA understands that. They will be able to certify it and say, yep, looks good to us. You can go ahead and make that. And then they'll look at your production processes, how you make it, and they say, yep, looks familiar to us. You can go ahead and bring those to market and sell them. But when it's something new, okay, they're very cautious. They have to really understand it deeply. They have to put together lots of tests, lots of things. And, by rights, that's their job. But it's different from, say, down in New Zealand, where with them, it's, they have the same safety as their primary concern, but they take a different attitude, a different approach. They become your partner. They say, well, let's work together and figure out how we get this to market. Let's work together and figure out how we solve this problem that we find along the way. Let's think creatively and collaboratively together. And that's not historically been the approach in the United States. And I was very gratified when I was on the founding board of the Air Electric Aircraft Corporation, which was subsumed and is now part of By Aerospace, brand new, and it's an electric airplane, an electric training airplane, electric motors. That's never been done before in the United States. And the FAA regulator that that was head of the small aircraft directorate at the time, we spoke with him, and we were saying, well, okay, so how do we get this, through the design process? And he said, well, gee, instead of working in Denver with the local Denver office as you normally would, I'd like you to work with the Chicago office, because that's where I've concentrated all of my folks who are experts on engines. And they're going to become experts on electric motors. So I want you to work with them, because that's their mandate, is to figure this out. And I remember there was this one early on meeting where there were, maybe 4 or 5 people from By Aerospace on this phone call. And there were maybe 20, 25 people from the FAA, all wanting to participate, all wanting to figure it out, all wanting to be involved in this. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is something new for the FAA. But because of that focus on safety and that natural caution, it takes years when you have something that is brand new, such as electric aviation. It also can take a long, long time when you have something that is different, that is going into an existing product, such as sustainable fuels going into existing engines. Okay, and to figure out, will they work or will they not? Now, with existing engines, there are a large number of technical issues, which I'm not going to go into, but just the bottom line is that the fuel that you put in the engine has to be the right kind to be able to ignite and produce power. Okay, and there are some engines where you can put in jet fuel. That's the right fuel. But if you try to put in, gasoline that you would put in your car, it doesn't ignite properly, and it can in fact ruin the engine, and vice versa. Okay, in fact, every time I go fly my general aviation airplane, I drain out a little bit of fuel and make sure that it's the right color, because that color tells me whether it's the right type of fuel for that engine. Okay, and unfortunately, there are some engines, particularly those that burn the most amount of the polluting gas, that require certain mixtures and cannot burn sustainable fuel, or at least they haven't been able to do so today. So what do? Okay, have these folks replace those engines? Well, some of them cost $500,000. Some of them cost $1 million. That's a terrific burden on the industry. But it may in fact be what needs to happen for us to be able to get rid of the most polluting kind of fuel that we have. Another thing is to say, well, how's about designing a brand new engine from the ground up? And I was chairman of the board of Delta Hawk Engines, where that was their mission. An entirely brand new diesel engine that would burn a variety of fuels. In fact, we demonstrated that it could burn cooking oil. Just think, if all of the McDonald's took all of their cooking oil that they could no longer use to burn to cook French fries, and concentrated it, refined it, and got that into airplanes, boy, wouldn't that be a great thing to do? And it's from plants, it's renewable, it's sustainable. Wouldn't that be great? Well, this engine could do that, and it had 40% fewer moving parts than traditional engines, which, by the way, are the best in 1950s technology. But to be able to get it to market, very complicated because it was new and hadn't been seen before by the regulator. Lots of different tests that have to be done, and it's still not on the market today. But one of the first organizations standing in line, waiting for that 2C trainer from By Aerospace, is a woman-owned flight school. So we're all rooting for it.
You mentioned By Aviation and George By. Am I correct that you have flown with him in his electric airplane? And can you tell us about it?
Actually, I haven't flown in his airplane yet because it's still going through the certification process. And when an aircraft is being certified, you have to be very careful with a very short list of test pilots who are able to fly it. But I've spoken with the test pilots, and I've also seen, from the outside, what it looks like to start it up, taxi, and fly it. And you can see videos, in fact, on YouTube of this airplane flying. And it flies just like any other airplane. Okay? In fact, that's an important certification decision, because since it flies like just any other airplane, that simplifies the certification process. But what is different is how that power is produced, and how it is that you set up your electrical system for it, how it is that you have your instruments inside the cockpit in terms of how you start it, and how it is that you monitor it to make sure that it's running properly. So today's general aviation airplanes, many of them still have the old ignition type starter, similar to a car. Okay, some of them have a push button, and this one has more of a push button to get them started. But when it's running, it is so much more quiet. Okay, it's just this little purring of the motor and purring of the propeller, as opposed to the larger noise that you get in airplanes from traditional aircraft today, both smaller ones and the large jet engines. Part of that is the noise from the engine. A lot of that noise is from the propeller. Electric airplanes still have a propeller, so you still have propeller noise, but you don't have the engine noise. Essentially, the motor creates none. Another interesting thing is if you're taxiing, and let's say you taxi down to the end of the runway and you're not yet cleared to take off. So you sit there. In traditional airplanes, the engines keep running. Okay, the propeller keeps turning. You keep burning fuel. If you've been to Europe and driven a car there, they have a new method with automobiles where if you are at a stoplight for any period of time, the engine shuts down. And it can be very, very unnerving when this first happens. It shuts down. Okay. But as soon as you have a green light, put your foot on the gas, starts right up again, and you keep driving forward. Well, an electric motor is like that. So I'm sitting here at the end of the runway, not ready yet to take off, and the motor stops. You're sitting there going like, okay, are we still there? And your little monitor on the dashboard will tell you that, yep, the motor's still alive, it's still there. Okay, and as soon as you put the throttle back in, it starts right up again, taxi out, and you take off. Okay. Another difference is how it is that you understand how much fuel you have. In traditional airplanes, you have gas gauges, much like gas gauges on a car. And they tell you how much of whatever type of gas you're burning is in all the different gas tanks that you might have, whether it's 1, 2, 4, whatever. With an electric motor, okay, you have your fuel that comes from batteries. Okay? And so you have gauges that tell you how much electric charge you have, whether it is recharging. Let's say you've got cells on the top of the wing that take sunlight, convert that to additional electricity into the batteries. We tell you information about that, and also gives you an indication of how much flight time you have based on how much of that electricity you are using. Because in all airplanes that are running today, you have instrumentation that runs on electricity. Okay, electric airplanes, they have those same kinds of instrumentation that give you information about, navigating from place to place, gives you electric power for your radio. It may, in fact, power some of the instrumentation that monitors systems and so on and so forth. So that's draining on the battery, as well as the electric motor is draining on the battery. So it gives you that kind of information. And in fact, one of the major trade-offs in producing an electric airplane is the weight of the battery. Okay, because the more batteries you have, the longer you can fly, right? Okay, but an airplane can only carry so much weight. Okay, there's 4 forces of aviation, where you have thrust, your engine or your motor, power going forward, versus drag, how much the structure of the airplane, is slowing it down. If the gear is hanging out the way you have in a 2-seat trainer, that slows you down. And that's balanced one against the other in designing an airplane, against the how much lift you can produce, which is how much you can counteract gravity and the weight that you're carrying. So you've got these 4 different things that you're constantly adjusting and constantly doing trade-offs between them in designing an airplane. And once you have your airplane designed, okay, all of those 4 forces and how you build the structure of the airplane determines how much your useful load is, how much weight I can carry. Well, if I'm taking up all of my weight with my batteries, how am I going to have any weight, any useful load left for the people or any baggage? Okay. This is one of the reasons why you see the initial development of electric aviation in training airplanes. Okay, because training airplanes carry maximum 2 people, and you're not really carrying much of anything in terms of baggage going from point to point when you're going out to the practice area, practicing maneuvers and coming back, or if you're doing some of your cross countries, going maybe 50, 100, maybe 150 miles, what have you, and coming back, or and so on. So it simplifies the problem set when you're designing a new airplane. So that's where you see it. And there are a number of companies that are making developments in the electric space. And hopefully those aircraft will really be widely available on the market, because they would make such a big difference, both from the point of view of sustainability of the industry and sustainable fuels, but also in terms of available new airplanes for flight training.
Can you talk more about training new pilots, particularly in electric aircraft?
Absolutely. There is a significant pilot shortage that many people are doing their very best to address. First of all, to let younger folks know that aviation is a possibility for them. There are many people who don't see others who look like them as pilots. And so I'm working with a number of nonprofits who are attempting to demonstrate that it is a possibility, particularly to those populations who are underserved, and to say, hey, yeah, you too can go through and be a pilot. Or you can be an aircraft mechanic. There's severe shortages in mechanics. There's severe shortages in all of the different aviation industry jobs. Lots and lots of opportunity. You don't have to be a pilot to be involved in aviation. There's air traffic control. There's airport operations. There's marketing. There's accounting. There's management. Engineering. Huge, huge shortages in folks with an engineering bent. So if these things, if these industries and these areas are of interest to you, know that aviation is a place where you can find fulfillment with that particular interest that you have.
What would you say to young women out there looking to get into STEM classes?
It's very daunting for someone, let's say for some young woman who is fascinated by airplanes and perhaps wants to go to the airport and try it out and go for a discovery flight. Yeah, because just going to an airport and figuring out where it is that you might find an airplane, an instructor to go for an introductory flight can in and of itself be confusing and difficult. And it shouldn't be. Folks don't want to make it hard for them to be found. But just like, let's say you wanted to learn about boating or sailing, or you wanted to do race cars, or any other things like that, or horseback riding. Finding that initial entree to it and then seeing yourself be part of it is what will get people in there and get them hooked. So I would encourage aviation organizations to spend more time in schools, junior high, high school, college, showing people what's possible, helping them get over that initial hump in being connected to discovering what things are like, getting them involved in organizations like the Civil Air Patrol, which is specifically oriented towards junior high and high school, getting folks, for a Young Eagles flight through the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association, or getting involved in building an airplane. Great recent announcement, the local museum, Wings Over the Rockies, they had a project to build an experimental aircraft, which they did. And just in the last day or so, the director of the museum took it up for its first several test flights. Now that's an accomplishment. And think of all the wonderful things that these young men and women learned. And yes, there were a number of young women involved in the team building that airplane. And they learned all kinds of things about manufacturing techniques, how to buck rivets. Well, in this case, I guess it was a composite airplane. So, how to in fact put together airplanes made out of carbon fiber. And, the mechanics of it, the electronics, the engines, all the myriad of different things that are involved, and say, gee, maybe there's a home here for you. Maybe there's something that really, really gets you excited and you want to learn more.
Gretchen is a 99, a woman pilot, as am I. We 99s are dedicated to encouraging young women to consider becoming pilots.
Well, let me also mention that the 99s, which is the International Organization of Women Pilots, has its own first flight program called Let's Fly Now. And it is a way of introducing boys, girls, young men, young women, and mothers and fathers to the world of aviation by giving them their first flight. And if it sparks an interest, helping direct them to where it is that they can learn more, do more, get more involved. The the 99s has chapters. Chapters do have these kinds of programs. I belong to the Colorado chapter, and we're having a Let's Fly Now event at the Longmont Airport in May of this year, 2022. We hope to fly up to 30 non-pilots, give them their first taste of flight and what it's all about. And there are a number of organizations that do that. There are also programs that go into schools and do speaking, on career days, talk about that. I would counsel folks to do more of that. And colleges and universities that have aviation schools associated with them have been doing active recruiting at the high school level to get more people to check out their programs and see the degree to which those programs are of interest to them. And it's not, as I keep saying, it's not just about being a pilot or being a mechanic. A gentleman I know, in fact, he helped us 2 years ago sell our airplane. And by the way, welcome Elvis, who is my cat, who is wanting to help with this video recording. But the gentleman who helped us sell our airplane was a graduate of the local university and its aviation program. And he focused both on aviation management, but also had his degree in photography, because his desire was to get into aircraft buying and selling. And what helps sell an airplane but a gorgeous photo? Okay. Plus, a complete understanding of aircraft systems and how they fly. And he has his license, so he can ferry airplanes that he sells from one place to another, go pick up an airplane that one of his customers has bought. So he has woven all of these different disciplines and things that feed his soul into his pursuit of aviation. So it's possible to do it.
Gretchen, is anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, one other thing for the audience, and that's that opportunities will present themselves to you in your life. Opportunities that will probably stretch you beyond what you know you are capable of today, but are just enough of a step to stretch you. And I would encourage you to not just explore those opportunities, but to grab them with both hands and run after them, because that will not just build your own capabilities and your own self-confidence, but it will make your life that much more interesting and fulfilling. So go for it.
Gretchen, on behalf of the 99s and the Museum of Women Pilots, thank you so much.
You are most welcome.